Welcome to our Halloween special episode of Pod People, the podcast where we talk about horror movies and everything horror related. I have with me Eugene Lundeen.
Hello. Happy Halloween.
And Matisse Van Rossum.
Hello.
Whoa, who was that?
Just kidding. It was me.
Oh, dude, don't do that. The episode just started. Can't scare me like that just yet. Jeez.
But it's Halloween.
Oh, that's right. Or at least it will be when people listen to this.
Shut up, Eugene. It's Halloween right now.
Fuck, you're right. I'm sorry.
Every
Happy
day is
Halloween, everybody.
Inside.
It's a beautiful, sunny October 31st day. It is not raining at all.
It's not Monday, October 23rd. That is for sure.
No, that was last week. So this is Halloween time. Yeah, we're here in the now. This is live actually, if you didn't know. So if you're listening to this, hi Tyler. How are you?
Hey, Chad.
We see you. We see all of you.
Welcome to our Halloween Spooktacular, where we'll be talking about Boo 2, Medea Halloween.
Where the concept is scarier than the film could ever be.
We could probably do an episode on Tyler Perry horror movies. It'd probably be awful, but...
Oh, yeah, it would be bad. Well, I mean, they're probably scarier than most horror movies that are out right now.
Man, yeah, true.
Medea is pretty frightening.
I never introduced myself. I'm Ben, and I am...
Late to the party.
Absolutely. Last one in, first one out. That's my mantra.
All right, so speaking of Ben, do you have some news for us?
I do. Since we're talking about Halloween...
No, we're talking about Medea.
Medea's Halloween Spooktacular.
Yes, there we go.
We have a new Halloween movie on the horizon starring Jamie Lee Curtis was announced for next year.
No kidding, really?
Yeah.
I just saw the movie poster for this the other day, but other than that, I don't know shit about it, I must say.
Yeah, it was mostly just the poster. They haven't released any trailers or anything. It is directed by David Gordon Green, though, of Pineapple Express fame.
Okay.
Which will be interesting, to say the least.
Huh. He directed some other, horror movie recently, didn't he?
Really?
Well,
Maybe.
if you consider the movie with Jake Gyllenhaal, the victim of the Boston Marathon bombing, a horror film, then...
Your Highness was pretty horrifying.
Oh, yeah, no, that was really terrifying.
It's cool that Jamie Lee Curtis is in it, too. It's 40 years after the original?
Yeah, I guess so.
On top of that, it's coming out on my birthday next year.
Ooh, I know what we're doing.
All right, fantastic.
Getting blackout drunk in the movie theater.
Oh, yeah.
Getting kicked out.
Because those are always the best kind of people at the movies, the really drunk ones, so...
Especially at horror movies.
I said don't go in there! Oh, you stupid bitch.
Nothing makes for a better movie experience than somebody blackout drunk 2 rows ahead of you yelling at the screen and throwing up on the ground. And that'll be me.
Yeah, we gotta provide the extra entertainment, the interactivity.
Look out, Michael. Jamie Lee's got a baseball bat.
You're gonna be warning the serial killer?
Yes, somebody's got to look out for his best interests too, man.
Look out, Mikey! Mikey, watch out!
Mikey,
I'm so
no!
worried
Oh
for
no,
you.
Mikey!
We're Team Mikey on this podcast.
Absolutely.
I never liked Freaky Friday. I hated the remake.
Ooh, is Lindsay Lohan in this new Halloween movie?
I hope so.
Me too, dude. I haven't seen her in anything in forever, and I think she'd make a really great addition to the Halloween franchise.
Oh my god.
Yeah,
Certainly, I don't think she can be too picky. In these
Lindsay
days,
Lohan hasn't really done much in the past few years besides cocaine.
She can play the role of Michael Myers' mother in all the flashbacks. She'll take Sherry Moon Zombie's place.
Oh, well, it can be a debate on whether that would be an improvement or not over Sherry Moon Zombie, but we will get into that later.
let's just jump into the original Halloween.
Yeah, there we go. This episode is going to be a shorter one, and we're going to be focusing on just one franchise of films, the Halloween series. Everyone knows it. Most people love it, and we decided to put in our 2 cents about the whole movie. And we're going to be starting off, of course, with the original, the 1978 film.
By John Carpenter.
We should probably keep it brief on the summary.
Yeah, I think most people have probably seen Halloween.
Right.
At least horror fans. If you haven't, then you're kind of doing yourself a disservice.
If you haven't seen it, the general gist is crazy psychopath named Michael Myers kills a bunch of people when he's very young.
Well, no, he just kills his sister.
True.
Yeah, in the original. We'll get into the remake, but yeah, in the original, he just kills his older sister on Halloween night when he's 6 years old.
And he's immediately locked up. But one night, Halloween night, 1978, Michael Myers breaks free.
And he returns home to Haddonfield, Illinois.
It's a slasher movie.
Yeah, it's not complex. It's a big, scary, unstoppable killer wreaking some havoc on some teenagers, you know?
Yeah.
The legacy of this film is from the fact that so many of the tropes and techniques that were used in here were what sort of laid the groundwork for a bunch of other slasher movie monsters like Jason Voorhees or Freddy Krueger, things like that. Just teenagers getting murdered by an evil force.
Yeah, you can't really say that this is the first slasher film because it was preceded by things like
Black Christmas.
Christmas in 1974 and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But those didn't really kickstart the slasher genre in the same way that Halloween did. It was after this movie came out that we really started seeing an enormous influx of slasher films in the 80s.
Which, I mean, you still gotta always give it credit for that. While it might not have created anything new, but allowed for a whole stream of other movies similar to it to come out and create many of the horror movie franchises that we know today.
The devil's really in the details with this movie. Like we start with young Michael Myers, and it's all like POV as we follow him through the house.
Which they make great use of their Steadicams. Apparently, almost half of the budget for this film was just used on the camera equipment. So
it was pretty low budget, all in all.
Oh yeah, but only about $300,000 at their time. I mean, inflated for today, that's only a little over $1 million. So still pretty impressive for any horror movie with that much impact to be made for so little.
And you say half of it was used on
almost
the
about,
Steadicam?
yeah.
Wow.
And I mean, it shows because the film looks really good, and the fact that they have so many POV and tracking shots, it's something that they definitely put time into, and they wanted to make sure that with whatever budget they were working with, they could still make it look professional. So I think that's part of the success as well, that they were very smart with what they used their money on, because it's pretty light, the whole movie as a whole. You don't even see much blood or guts or gore or anything like that.
No, it's not a particularly gory movie. Yeah, that kind of stuff really exploded more in the 80s. As a horror fan, I've seen this movie, you know, probably a dozen times at least, and I imagine you guys have too.
Well, see, this was actually one of the first times I've seen it all the way through. So it was an experience for me. A lot of things I feel were pretty goofy in the whole thing, but the fact that it was such a low budget film and has such a significance in the industry, it's hard to overlook that sort of stuff.
Well, see, this time when we were watching it, I tried to look at it from the perspective of somebody seeing it in theaters, like when it first came out, knowing nothing, like having no context for the killer, Michael Myers, anything like that, which is of course hard because he's such an, you know, horror icon in this day and age, and we've all like grown up knowing Michael Myers just like we know Freddy and Jason and Leatherface. But I thought what's really cool at the very beginning is we see it from Michael Myers' perspective as he like watches his sister and her boyfriend like banging, and then he leaves, and then he goes in and kills her, and we don't even see that he's a child until after the murder has taken place. I think that must have been really cool for people who didn't have any context to be like, oh, this is a psycho killer coming in and murdering somebody, and then you see, oh no, it's just a little 6-year-old boy in a clown costume.
I love the use of the mask in that scene too. When Michael puts on the mask and you can only see through the terrible eye holes. It really kind of limits what you can see, so it leaves a lot to the imagination, which I think makes it a little more horrifying in a way.
I thought it was pretty goofy, though, how he grabs it and puts it on. It's almost like he's equipping it, like it's a game of Doom or something. Like you have the sound that goes on as it's put over his face, and it just it's a little odd. Again, I mean, it was a low budget film, and certainly doing that isn't very detrimental to the rest of the story. Just one of those, feels a little goofy.
They probably literally just put the mask like right over the lens of the camera.
We know someone that did that on one of their short films, and I mean, we saw pictures of how it looked on the camera. It looked goofy as hell, so I can only imagine how it looked for them just having paper mache or something all over the whole lens.
A camera wearing a clown mask.
I thought the limiting of the perspective was really smart, though.
Yeah,
and they do that a lot in subtle ways throughout the movie, and how they leave a lot up to the imagination.
I think a lot of that is probably just like trying to creatively work around their lack of budget, since they can't really afford to do a whole lot of gore and stuff.
I mean, yes and no, because I think part of that is, working within the realm of imagination, because they do that a lot with the rest of the movie. You see Michael Myers follow Jamie Lee Curtis' character in broad daylight the whole time, but you don't actually see him do anything for a while. It's left to the imagination.
Right. Well, he's obviously just like following her. We don't, other than the first kill that sets it up at the very beginning. Yeah, it's probably at least halfway into the movie before he kills anybody in present day.
Yeah, that is one thing. It certainly takes its time to build up everything, and not just building up Jamie Lee Curtis and her character, also sort of laying down the reason why Michael Myers targets them in the first place, because one of Jamie Lee Curtis's friends taunts Michael Myers as he's driving by in a car, which I guess he can drive in this one, even though he's been institutionalized since he was a kid. But
yeah, I always think that that's weird too, but they even do mention it when he first escapes, and Donald Pleasance is like, we have to go after him, I know where he's going, and the guard is like, oh, but he can't even drive a car, and Donald Pleasance is like, oh, but he's doing a pretty damn good job.
Right, he says that someone must have taught him, and then it's just sort of
who
accepted, okay, like a janitor or something. It's like, all right, Mikey, here's how you use the stick shift.
It was Danny Trejo. Yeah. Danny Trejo taught him to drive.
There's an interesting comparison, and we'll get into this a little bit more when we talk about the remake, but a lot of the subtlety from this movie just was not existent in the remake.
Yes.
And a lot of the effectiveness of this movie in terms of horror and scariness worked because of how subtle it was, I think.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I think it's a combination of limited budget and also just trying to be a little bit more subtle with it. But also, this is the late 70s. There's not a whole lot of really gratuitously gory movies out there to begin with. Texas Chainsaw gets pretty gory for its time around the end, and Alien, obviously, but that came out a year after this, so...
You could even say, The Exorcist, certainly it's tame compared to today's standards, but that had some pretty extreme scenes within it as well. With Linda Blair stabbing herself in the crotch, and I think there was certainly an amount of violence and gore that was making its way into mainstream horror films, but nothing like we know it as today.
Right, yeah, it's totally different context at that time. There's nothing wrong with that. You definitely don't need an outpouring of blood to make an effective horror movie.
it shows a level of intelligence with the film and how they're trying to do it, because they use the fact that they're on a low budget and that they may not have enough for the effects of gore or blood or that matter, and they use it to good effect to try and just keep things subdued and to make it more of a slow burn rather than just a all up in your face gore or anything like that.
I think this film makes really great use of perspective. We see so much of the movie from Michael's perspective, from his point of view. And this wasn't brand new. Like they really did a lot of that in Black Christmas, which is a fucking awesome movie. I love that movie. But that one really didn't have the same cultural impact as this movie did.
No, well, it's interesting because apparently John Carpenter, he was a big fan of Black Christmas, and he had first intended to try and do some sort of sequel or something branching off that movie, but then this turned into its own creation, and, well, who knows how it would have been different if it were Black Christmas 2 instead of its own Halloween movie. I mean, we wouldn't have the iconic Michael Myers, which also we don't even see in The Mask until, like, maybe the last 40 minutes of the film.
Well, no, that's not true. When he's following Jamie Lee Curtis around, he's wearing the mask. Although we only see him from a distance, like when she looks out the window of her classroom and he's across the street, or he's standing like in her backyard or behind the hedge. So it's like you can't really see the mask too well. So you don't really get a good impression of it until much later in the movie, but he's got it on the whole time.
That's true, but when you have the full, I guess, reveal, when you can sort of take in his whole appearance, that happens much later in the film.
And I think that's a really good pacing in terms of the reveal, because I think it's cool that he is just sort of out in broad daylight in the beginning and like stalking these girls, but we really don't see him too well because he's always so far off. So it's like you get an impression of what he's like, but you don't really get a full understanding until you see him much later on.
It's kind of like, I mean, I know this came out afterwards, but with the first Nightmare on Elm Street, I mean, we know Freddy Krueger now, we know what he looks like, and he's a goofball in all the others, but in the first, he's shrouded in a bunch of darkness. He actually is much more of a sinister villain than I think a lot of people remember him as.
For the most part. There's still a couple of humorous things in the original.
Right, but I think it's certainly played much straighter than a lot of the other movies take him in. I mean, nothing close to the Power Glove or anything of that matter, so.
I do love how Michael Myers is in broad daylight, though. Like, I feel like it's an easy out to just hide your villain in the shadows. Carpenter in this movie was like, fuck that, we'll put Michael Myers broad daylight. You know, everyone can see him, he doesn't care.
Yeah, it's all about perspective, because you do still not really get, like I said, the best impression of him until later, but they're not afraid to show him early on, you know. And I believe the actor playing Michael Myers in The Mask is just credited as The Shape, I think.
Yeah, which is odd, because near the end of the film, you get to see Michael Myers' face, just for a quick second.
Yeah, very briefly.
And I guess that's not the same actor who's been playing Michael Myers in the rest of the movie, and so they're credited as two different people.
Yeah, they're credited separately, and the one who you only see for a second when Jamie Lee Curtis pulls his mask off is credited as Michael Myers.
Which is a shame.
It's kind of weird, I think.
I heard they had to switch people out like weekly to play Michael Myers because of scheduling conflicts.
Well, it certainly makes it easy just to have someone who's covered head to toe. He doesn't have any distinctive features.
Other than his height, he's tall.
Right.
You know, as long as they can get somebody of similar height and physique.
Get him elevator boots or something.
Yeah.
What'd you guys think of the mask in this one? the William Shatner mask.
Well,
right,
I think it's because apparently they were experimenting with a lot of other masks. At first, it was going to be more of just like a clown mask. That might have ruined the movie, I think, if they did that. One great thing about that mask is it's so plain, it's so unreadable, and so...
It's expressionless.
Yeah, you don't think that it's funny, or you don't think that it's not even truly scary, the mask itself. The real fear, if anything, from it is just that you can't understand anything that's going on within his head because it's so just...
Right, it just looks like a person's face, just without any sort of expression. I do think it's funny that this was just a fucking William Shatner Captain Kirk mask that they went out and bought and doctored a little bit. I think it's pretty unrecognizable, but that being said, I wonder if when this movie came out in 78, if people were going to the movie and seeing it and be like, is he wearing a William Shatner mask?
I don't think so. I heard a story that Shatner himself didn't even know it was a Shatner mask until like a decade or two later.
Yeah, well, I mean, they did some stuff to it. Like, I think they spray painted it white and, messed up the hair and stuff. So it really doesn't look like Shatner. But, that's a creative workaround when they couldn't do what they originally wanted to do. Fuck it. Just go out and buy a fucking Captain Kirk mask and make do with that.
Right, which again just shows that they thought this out. I mean, at least to the point where they were able to overcome hurdles with costume design. I mean, even Jamie Lee Curtis, apparently she had to buy her own wardrobe for this film.
I've always heard the production of this movie was kind of a hot mess with all kinds of scheduling conflicts and budgetary constraints and shit like that, which, I mean, I guess any good film is always going to be fraught with that kind of stuff.
You know what's weird to me about Jamie Lee Curtis in this movie is she was the only teenager of the three to actually be a teen in the movie.
She
looks like
the
she's
oldest.
30. She always looks old.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess that's the curse of Jamie Lee Curtis, just having kind of an old looking face.
And it is significant to note that this was her like debut film role.
Right, yes. Yeah. All thanks because of her mother.
Yep, Vivian Leigh.
The woman who gets murdered in Psycho.
Yep.
Because of that, she was able to get this and probably just help propel her career forward.
Like Jamie Lee Curtis is like the original Scream Queen, man.
With all of the trouble that you hear within production, it doesn't show very much in the movie itself.
No, it's pretty tight. I think that just goes to show that John Carpenter is a really good filmmaker.
Right. I know Assault on Precinct 13 was made for even less than this movie was, and so it seems like he really understood how to work on a budget. And the fact he did the music as well for it shows that he really went all in to try and make this movie. And while everyone knows the Halloween theme, it's so iconic.
And I know that he himself never thought that theme would become so iconic. He really just threw it together super quickly. I think, again, scheduling problems. He didn't have a whole lot of time to do the score for this, so he just kind of like threw it together. And now that's a little piece of music, just like the Jaws theme, that anybody hears it and they know exactly what it's from. It has such a legacy of its own at this point.
Well, the thing about John Carpenter's scores in general are they're usually pretty minimal, but because they have a strong melodic theme to them, they usually become pretty iconic.
Always really catchy.
Yeah, but I guess one thing I want to talk about before we move on is when Michael Myers' mask is removed at the end. A lot of audiences found his actual face really horrifying.
I've always thought he looks kind of derpy.
I guess people thought he looked horribly disfigured, but they actually didn't do much to his face besides put maybe like a little mark for where he got like scratched or whatever. So that's just his face.
That's just how he looks.
Carpenter attributed it to like power of suggestion, which I guess can really be the mantra of this whole movie. Like power of suggestion, keeping things subtle really works in your favor.
Oh yeah, I agree.
He puts a good amount of effort into making Michael Myers just a completely unsympathetic character. and to show that he is remorseless or that he is evil. And so that way, when he does escape, the limits of what he may do were known to be that he'd do some pretty awful things, but we don't know what they're going to be until he starts to get closer and closer to these teens.
Well, I think that's what makes him such a scary character, too, is that we never, at least in this movie, we never really learn anything about him, who he is, other than that when he was 6, he killed his sister and that he's been in an insane asylum for years. And according to his doctor, he's pure remorseless evil. Other than that, we know nothing. And so that once again leaves a lot open to interpretation, so you can really sort of project your own fears onto him. He's very much a blank slate. He's an unstoppable force that you can, really think anything you want about. Anything is within the realm of possibility with him, especially because, he gets shot and falls off the balcony at the end, and then he just gets up and walks away. Like, is he even really a man,
Well, I think that's a good point you make, the projecting your own fears onto this, because it would explain how promiscuous teens go out and do immoral acts with each other, and then Michael Myers comes to murder them, and so it's caused a lot of people to take it as sort of a commentary on the deviancy that the youth commit. One reason people feel that way is because Jamie Lee Curtis's character, she's the one character in this who doesn't have a boyfriend, and so a lot of people have taken it as a sense of purity,
and that's become a major theme in horror films throughout the years,
which is interesting because John Carpenter didn't even intend for that to happen. His idea was just, well, sometimes teens are just so caught up in trying to fuck that they don't pay attention to the world around them, and so it leaves them open for attack.
Right, and that's once again intention versus interpretation. Like, that's the way John Carpenter intended it, but that's not the way a lot of people in the world interpreted it. And because of that, in a lot of horror movies after this, and even a couple before this, it's always the ones who are off having sex or getting drunk or doing drugs. They're always like the first ones to get killed. Although what I do like in this is that because John Carpenter wasn't intending for Jamie Lee Curtis's character to be like pure or anything, that he doesn't push that too far, other than the fact that she just doesn't have a boyfriend and she's not off getting laid. But she is, early in the movie driving around with one of her friends smoking a joint. So,
which is a great scene.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Don't Fear the Reaper, which I think was a little dated now.
Yes.
But I think at the time, having Don't Fear the Reaper played while Michael Myers is driving behind them.
Yeah, it works really well. And that's one of those things that's sort of an unnecessary callback in the remake when they keep playing Don't Fear the Reaper every time Michael Myers is like nearby.
Oh god. Yeah, but we're gonna have to
Right, we'll get into that.
We have I certainly have a lot to say about that one.
So. There's definitely plenty of corny stuff in this original one, and for all its subtlety, there are certain things that are a little heavy-handed. I think the best example, at least for me, is when Jamie Lee Curtis is in class and her super boring deadpan teacher is like giving a lecture on fate or something. I don't remember the writer that they're talking about, but talking about how you can't escape your fate and that fate is an unstoppable force that will just keep coming no matter how long you try to run from it. It's like, oh, well, that's Michael Myers then, isn't it? But, that's... those are minor things that I think are a little goofy. They make you roll your eyes a little bit, but overall don't really hurt the film as a whole.
Because again, there's so much to appreciate about this movie, and the amount that they put into it shines through and really helps to elevate the movie from any other slasher film that you may see. It's a smart movie. It has some goofy moments, but it understands what it's trying to do, and for the most part, I think it does it pretty well.
Yeah, I think so. And we'll of course be going back more to talk about things from this movie as we compare it to the remake. But before we get into that, do you guys just want to go ahead and give this a quick rating?
Sure.
Yeah.
I would give this a 5 out of 5 pods.
Yeah, me too. Easy, 5 out of 5. It's despite the the little corny things here and there, it's still extremely entertaining. It's a really tight film, straightforward narrative, done really well, and has spawned a legacy that will never die, much like Michael Myers himself. So 5 out of 5 for me.
I do think the movie is great. I think one trouble is that it's hard to look at this movie because of everything that came after it. When you watch it, you can't help but just feel like it's hitting all of the notes that every other slasher movie that you may see hits. And that's because, it laid the groundwork for a lot of those. And so I think a lot of people might feel bored or underwhelmed by this film, but to take into account its low budget and the fact that there was just so much skill that seems to be put into this. The fact that they understood that the money should go into making the movie look good, and then to try and craft it around that. And so I think for me, it is hurt a bit just because it is certainly dated now because of all the other movies that have come out, but I'm going to give it a 4.5. So.
All right. So almost a perfect 5.
Almost a perfect score.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry to bring it down one, but
it's okay. Armand White.
So this ain't no Suicide Squad.
So that'll give us an average rating of 4.8 pods. So very, very high. So now let's get into the remake and compare that. This remake came out in 2007, directed by Rob Zombie, and for the most part, I'd say the whole central story is almost exactly the same as the original. So even some of the shots are the same. But outside of that, we get this extremely long backstory of Michael Myers at the beginning, where we see that he comes from a sort of white trash household. His stepdad is abusive, both physically and emotionally. His mom is a stripper. His sister is a bitch, I guess. She's just like super mean to him. And he's bullied at school a lot. So
bullied by the fucking Judy from Spy Kids, Daryl Sabara. Fucking
bullied by Junie from Spy Kids.
Having to grease your face every time you see him on screen.
Yeah, and at the beginning we see him killing his pet rat, and then he gets in a fight at school, and the principal calls his mom and shows her that he's been carrying around a dead cat in his backpack.
She reacts to very calmly.
Yeah, she's not concerned about that at all. She's like, "So what? He found a dead cat.
It's just a dead cat.
Kids do that.
We've all carried around a dead cat before. Come on."
Yeah, sometimes you see a squirrel on the ground, you just want to swing it by its tail or something and throw it at a building. Come on, fun with dead animals.
And then he beats Junie from Spy Kids to death with a log in a very protracted sequence that lasts fucking forever. And then on Halloween goes out trick-or-treating and then comes back and murders his whole family except for his mom.
Oh, and his baby sister.
And the baby sister.
Which already, they're ranking up the kill count from 1 to 3 over there.
Yeah, exactly. Well, no, I guess it's 3.
And I guess depending on how many animals you can consider build up to 1, because I guess he did murder a lot of cats. And
Rob Zombie goes out of his way in this movie to make the family just the most hateable family.
Right,
though.
Just absolute scummy trash. Whereas in the first or the original one, we really only see his sister at the beginning and her boyfriend, but they seem to live in a perfectly average middle-class household. Nothing wrong. This seems like trying a bit too hard to give Michael Myers like a backstory.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest missteps I think Rob Zombie took with this, because he wanted to try and make it his own, and he specifically wanted to try and explain more of Michael Myers, which is one of the reasons why Michael Myers is so interesting as a character, that you don't know anything about him. All you know is that he's capable of this evil, and you don't know why. And so that unknowing means he has the potential for everything, where in this, they just sort of make him just a abused kid who later in the film basically has the mentality of the 12-year-old or whatever, how old he was when the first scene happens.
Yeah, and also this whole intro sequence, I don't think it's poorly executed by any means. Like, it's fine from a filmmaking standpoint. It just seems really unnecessary because we've already been shown, even in this, that Michael Myers is a psychopath, that he is killing animals and he kills his bully and he's just totally remorseless. So why do we need to have him have this really trashy, abusive family? Because he would be a psycho regardless, They
explain too much why. They try to justify why Michael Myers does what he does in a lot of ways. And
right, which isn't the point of any of these movies. It's not to understand why Michael Myers is doing this. It's to escape him. It's to run away from this monster.
Yeah, I think characterizing him too much actually makes him less scary.
Well, yeah, because when you explain why he does it, you can't be scared of what you know.
Right.
It's harder to be scared of Michael Myers in this movie. Also, Michael Myers talks at a young age a lot, which is very strange to me.
Because otherwise, he's always been a completely silent killer. And he still is as an adult in this one. But as a kid, he talks a lot. And I think that hurts him too.
Right, because unfortunately, the kid that's playing Michael Myers isn't really very good. I mean, hey, that's just the problem with child actors sometimes. But it seems like because he wears a mask a lot in his childhood scenes, and so it almost feels like they did it so they didn't have to worry about having because it seems like he has a blank expression on his face almost every other time you see his actual face on screen.
Well,
and it's just
after he kills his whole family except for his mom and his baby sister, apparently the only two people he's capable of loving, he gets taken away. And in this one, the psychiatrist role, Donald Pleasance, is played by Malcolm McDowell.
Before we get into that, I want to talk about how great William Forsythe is as the crippled dad.
Okay.
Oh man, he does a great performance.
He does, but he's just so cartoonishly terrible.
Yeah, he is so cartoonishly terrible, but that's why it's pretty hilarious.
No, it's extremely funny. Like when he's fighting with the mom at the breakfast table at the beginning, he says, "I'm gonna crawl over there and skull fuck the shit out of you."
He throws everything off the table and just watches her as she picks it up.
Yeah.
There's some really funny details in that. They use them well.
And talking about his stepdaughter, she's like, "Oh, she's got a nice little donk on her." Just it's so fucking terrible and douchey, but really hilarious at the same time.
Yeah, it seems odd, Rob Zombie's choice or decision to make the family so unsympathetic, because it honestly could have worked if they were a regular family, but Michael Myers still acted the same way, because you would still have to wonder why he was so evil and not explain it. He's in an abusive family.
That's what I'm saying. He's still a psycho regardless, and I think to have him come from a loving, well-adjusted family would make him even scarier, because if he kills all of them, then he really just does it for fun, But it feels in this one like vengeance when he's killing his bully and killing his abusive dad or stepdad and his bitchy sister and her gross boyfriend. It all feels like vengeance, but then later he's killing people for no reason.
Yeah.
So it's why do we need to have all of these people be so terrible and hateable?
Well,
I think that's just kind of a thing that Rob Zombie does.
Yeah, he just sleaze is totally in his wheelhouse.
Yeah, he loves really, really sleazy characters. And I I think that it's detrimental sometimes because then there's no dichotomy because everybody is just a total sleazebag. You need some good people to balance it out, you know?
Right, yeah, or else it's all just caricatures at a certain point.
Yeah.
You just don't know how to write characters.
Right, and like he does sleazy people really well. Like he's super good at it. But even like Michael's mother, who is like one of the only good characters, and she ends up killing herself because she feels, you know, guilty that she's raised a psycho. She's just super flat. Like she's very, you know, she's a sweet character. She's good to Michael. She's the only one who doesn't shit on him constantly.
Right, but that's sort of
But
just like
she's-
the bar that's set.
Right.
She just isn't the absolute worst to Michael.
Yeah, she's flat and uninteresting because of it.
Yeah, the only other foil to that kind of is Malcolm McDowell.
A little bit.
But he's still pretty sleazy in how obsessed and congratulatory he is towards his own work.
Right. Well, he definitely exploits having worked with Michael Myers, you know, into his book, and so he's definitely exploitative. But we get a little bit more of their relationship, which is one of the few things that I think actually kind of worked in this movie, because in the original, Donald Pleasance is just like, oh yeah, I've been studying Michael for 15 years. He's pure evil. Just that's it. Whereas with Malcolm McDowell, he actually seems to care kind of when Michael is first admitted.
It is a little weird, though, that they decide to have him show up before Michael's even institutionalized, and so they can say, oh, he's been close to him ever since he was in school and stuff. It just feels odd. Why is he going out of his way to talk to some kid in middle school that
he first shows up with his super 70s haircut
Yes, he looks great and trashy.
Right, when the principal calls in Michael's mom to talk about like all the Polaroids of dead animals that Michael's carrying around, he's like, oh, here's Dr. Loomis, he's a child psychologist. And then after Michael kills everybody, then he like gets assigned to him or whatever. I think all of the stuff at the asylum when Michael is a kid is really unnecessary.
Oh, that's some of the worst parts of this entire movie, because they make it so that he has an obsession with masks, and they do it in a very awful way, I think, just to say, oh, I use this to hide myself, and it's like, okay.
We
didn't
already
need that.
We already got him wearing a mask during the first kills.
Right, he's wearing his clown mask, which I think is the exact same clown mask.
Well, no, wasn't he wearing the oversized Michael Myers mask?
Oh, yes, the way they introduced the mask is fucking terrible.
Yeah. Well, he starts off wearing the clown mask because he's dressed like a clown for Halloween.
Which apparently was supposed to be closer to what they had intended for the original Michael Myers mask to be. They wanted it to be more of the
I'm so
clown,
glad they didn't go
Yeah,
with
no,
that.
good. They dodged a bullet on that
Yeah.
one. It would have been awful.
Yeah. But yeah, then when his sister and her boyfriend are having sex, the boyfriend puts on the fucking Michael Myers mask.
Which is just so dumb. It's a dumb way to introduce the
It's so stupid. And also it raises the questions like, is Halloween canon in Halloween? Or is this just some dumb looking mask that he got at the store?
Time is a flat circle.
Yeah, basically. And he's like, come on, babe, I want to wear the mask while we do it, which I thought was really funny. But yeah, that's a good point to bring up, is after Michael kills the stepdad, he goes up to his sister's room and finds the mask lying on the floor, and he puts it on.
Which is, it's way too big.
It's way too big. He looks like he's got a giant head, and it's so funny. I couldn't take any of that shit seriously, where he's like chasing her down the hall and like stabbing her over and over again, and he just looks like a bobblehead.
Yeah, bad move to put in a wide shot of him walking down.
Really terrible. Yeah, that was probably one of the most ill-informed decisions they could have made.
Man, it was so funny though.
It was hilarious. And that's an important thing to note about this movie, is that a lot of the shit that they do is extremely unnecessary, but at the same time really, really entertaining.
Well, it's weird because, I don't think intention really matters as long as the end product is something. But it poses a question. Do you think Rob Zombie intended stuff like that to be funny?
No, I do not.
No, I don't believe that.
Because
for
a lot of
second.
his other movies have a lot of humor in them in similar ways, like between House of a Thousand Corpses and Devil's Rejects.
I haven't actually seen either of
Yeah,
those
but I
movies,
feel
so.
like if assuming that he's a fan of the Halloween series, that he wouldn't want to try and do anything like that to turn the mask and the character Michael Myers into a joke. I think he'd be more sensitive to it. And certainly with the time that he puts into building up this family, while it isn't good, it shows that he wanted to try and explain Michael Myers in a way and actually provide a backstory. And so
yeah, it comes across like he's taking it very seriously. Like, he obviously loves the franchise, and I can appreciate that he wants to add to it and expand on it. I think it's good intentioned for the most part.
And it's just the problem that all of his choices really are detriments to the film than they are.
Yeah, a lot of what he does is extremely detrimental, and all of the subtlety that we talked about in the original is gone completely. This one is gratuitously violent. Some pretty entertaining kills, some good effects, good gore. But yeah, it doesn't. He
All
doesn't
of the
leave.
subtlety is just ripped from it.
He does not leave very much up to the imagination.
And
at
that's
all.
what makes the mental hospital that he's at, those scenes just so much more. The way they drag is they spend so much time just trying to explain Michael Myers, but it's done in a very boring way. It just keeps cutting between interviews with the kid and Malcolm McDowell, and then it will cut over to just footage of Michael Myers with masks, which are some of the dumbest looking masks. I don't know how they got it in their head that it would be a good idea that he has an obsession with creating masks.
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be because he's a kid, so a lot of them are like very childish looking masks.
But I think it's that problem that it's too goofy. I get that it is made by a kid, but
it is goofy. I'm not disputing that at all.
Yeah,
It's
they should have
goofy.
put a little more thought into him, because it looks like he's just wearing paper plates on his face or something like that. It's so unimpressive.
And he's got like that long stringy blonde hair.
Yes. Oh, it just doesn't look great at all.
And fucking Sherry Moon Zombie, his mom, coming to visit him and like walking around, and she tries to take off his mask, and he just like, put my mask back on. Please put my mask back on. I guess it's supposed to be like the reason he stops talking is because he's so isolated at this.
Well, one of the things that really triggers it off is there's a whole subplot with Danny Trejo being his friend. And the first time we see Danny Trejo, he tries to comfort Michael Myers.
He's like one of the guards or the janitor or something.
You just have to live inside the world of your head. I was a convict too.
Right, he's like, I've been locked up before. I know what it's like.
I did some time behind walls too, Mikey. You just gotta live in your head.
Which
he
maybe
takes
not
it
is
super serious.
Not the best advice to give to a mental patient. You just gotta think in your head, man. You gotta ignore the outside world.
Bad advice to give to a psychopath,
and that's
even if he's
kind of
just
what
a child.
Sets off the mask thing in a lot of ways. But oh man, all of the masks are bad. We get to a scene where they're like talking over lunch, and Mikey is refusing to talk to either Sherry Moo Zombie or Malcolm McDowell, and they both kind of leave. And for some reason, they gave him metal silverware.
Yep, they were at lunch and they gave a dangerous mental patient, metal silverware, and he stabs one of the nurses in the neck with his fork.
Right, a nurse that, I mean, she's like, okay, I'll be here, but I'm gonna look in this direction.
Yeah, she turns her back on a dangerous mental patient. That was the impression that I got from this whole insane asylum or psychiatric hospital or whatever, is that every single person working there should not have been working there.
All awful at their
All
job.
just so bad at their jobs. Like Danny Trejo giving him really bad advice. Malcolm McDowell just leaving him alone with a metal fork. The nurse for turning her back on him. And then later when he's an adult, they've got like the two other guards who are
just a bunch of racists.
Once again, the
rapists
sleaziest possible people, like the kind of people who would never ever be hired for a job like that. And they lead to his escape because they decide to rape one of the new female patients, but they decide they want to do it in Michael Myers' room,
which goes on for too long.
It goes on for too long, and also it doesn't make any sense.
Makes no sense.
Like they open up his cell, they leave the door open, they're raping this woman on his bed while he's just sitting there, and they're not paying him any attention at all. They're just berating him.
And he's not even binded or anything. He has
he's
handcuffs.
He's not handcuffed. He's a fucking big old giant scary dude. Well, his room is just covered in all the masks, and I thought that was really stupid too.
That was dumb.
And yeah, and so they just, think that everything's gonna be okay. So he of course murders the shit out of them easily and escapes.
Well, it's funny because he doesn't respond at all during the rape.
Right, he lets it finish. It's basically over by the time that he gets up to do anything.
He only responds when they touch his mask.
When one of them puts on one of his masks, and then he murders the shit out of them.
Which shows just more of his the man-child mentality they seem to give Michael Myers.
Well, it's funny too because one of the guards, it was like his first day, and they were introducing his cell, Michael Myers' cell, and they were like, "Oh, be super careful. He's a killer." And then immediately later that night, they break in and just let him escape.
And he's not cuffed or bound in any way, and they just leave his door open as well, the door to his cell. It's just so dumb. It doesn't make any sense.
Especially when they're looking over the security footage, Malcolm McDowell is telling them, "How did you let him get away?" And they're like, "You should have warned us. He was so tough." It's like you have it on camera. I imagine if you looked at the footage, your workers going and grabbing a woman from her cell and taking her to Michael Myers. So it seems like one of those weird, dumb, just phrases that makes no sense if you remember how everything happened.
No, that's a great point. The warden tells Malcolm McDowell, "Well, if you didn't think our security was good enough, then you should have said something." Like, this kid has been there for 18 years. He murdered his whole family, murdered a nurse with a fork. Like, he's already proven himself to be completely unstable. Like, you should know. You should just know this.
Man, I was mad that they killed Danny Trejo's character.
Me too.
He
did nothing. Well, he did something wrong.
I think it was just to further show that Michael Myers has no remorse or doesn't care about anybody, because the whole time he's killing Danny Trejo, he keeps being like, "I was good to you, Mikey."
Yeah, Mikey, why?
Mikey, why? I was good to you. And it's like, yeah, he was good to Mikey, and Mikey still murders the shit out of him. So we know Michael Myers kills people and has no remorse.
Which again,
Congrats.
I think is an odd flaw, because even with all the murders, they do have some sense of reason behind it, usually relating to a sister. Like, well, that one, the friend of his sister, he murders, is taunting him out on the streets, just calling him a fuckbag, and then he murders the parents of his, the
right. Well,
that's
an important thing that we should provide some context for, is that the Laurie character, who's played by Jamie Lee Curtis in the original, turns out to be Michael Myers' baby sister,
which
the one from the beginning,
apparently was something that was introduced during Halloween H2O and wasn't put in any of the others, and so it's this weird retcon that some of the films in the Halloween franchise aren't even part of that timeline because they don't introduce that idea.
Right. Well, the sequel to this remake that Rob Zombie did is once again about him trying to come after his sister, but in this one, one, Michael Myers' motivation is he's going back to Haddonfield to find his sister.
Well, another thing that sets him off too is Sherry Moon Zombie brings a picture of him and his baby sister
Right.
to the prison, and that's why he stabs the woman with the fork.
Yeah, because she says something like, "That's a cute baby, couldn't be related to you." Word to the wise: don't goad psycho killers. Don't insult them.
Yeah, right.
That's a bad idea. Yeah, I mean, I think we can, for the most part, pretty well gloss over the whole middle section because, like I said,
it's basically the same.
Yeah.
it's note for note the original movie,
got the
except
spooky house.
the spooky house. The kills are a little more graphic and gratuitous, but for the most part, it's the same.
You know what it was lacking for me?
What was that?
Open palm slaps.
Yes. Oh, you're so right. Because in the original, he just like slaps his way through everything, like the car window when he escapes at the beginning, like the door later. Like he's not even punching; he's just open hand slapping his way through things. Yeah. And there's none of that in this remake.
The one thing they did try and rectify was that Michael Myers doesn't drive a car in this one, so they knew that was a big plot hole in the first film, so...
I thought it was dumber because he didn't, though. Because, like, he takes this huge headstone and just, like, carries it a few miles on foot.
I still would have really loved in the original if it had been realistic when he steals the car. And it was the 70s, so it was probably a stick shift, and he's just, like, scooting up the street, like, very slowly, just, like, stalling out every few feet because he's never driven a fucking car before.
You hear the car grinding the whole way.
And then at some point, he just gives up and gets out and runs away. I thought that would have been really good. Okay, so, yeah, like I said, we can pretty much gloss over the middle because it's all about the same. Cast-wise and acting-wise, I think this movie's pretty decent for the most part.
I mean, really, Malcolm McDowell shines as
I love Brad Dourif as the sheriff.
That's right.
Because I love Brad Dourif. He has a much larger role in the second movie. I don't know, the big guy who plays Michael he doesn't talk at all. He's just in the mask. We should mention that when he goes back to the house after he escapes, he goes into the basement and like pulls up the floorboards, and he's got the knife and the old Michael Myers mask hidden there.
Right, which again, are they trying to make some sort of point like it's some quasi-sexual thing, his obsession with the mask? Because even before he murders his sister in the beginning, he's like touching her legs and stuff.
Yeah,
and
I don't know about that. I think it's more so an excuse for them to have the mask look worn and torn. So
but it's a shame
so it looks
that
edgier.
It's like the fact that it's a mask that his sister's boyfriend had,
right?
And he has an attachment to it for some reason. It's nonsensical.
It is pretty nonsensical. I also couldn't help but notice that when he puts on the Michael Myers mask, his long stringy hair just kind of disappears because it should be like poking out the bottom of the mask, but
he puts it in a man bun.
Yeah, he tucks his gross hair up into the mask. I know that's just a super minor thing, but I noticed it every time he showed up on screen. I'm like, where's his gross hair?
Yeah, well, he lets his bangs grow out over his eyes. Even, like, put up, like, those eye holes aren't that big to begin with. You're gonna be struggling there, bud.
He would have some pretty impeded visibility. But yeah, it goes through the same basic plot until the end, where the original one ends. They do the same thing, where it's Malcolm McDowell and Laurie in the car, and she says, "Is that the boogeyman or something?" And he's like, "As a matter of fact, I do believe it is," which is like the exact same line from the original.
Which would have been good if they ended it
ended it there like they did in the original.
Unfortunately, there are like 20 more minutes.
Yeah,
after
then
that point.
then Michael comes back after being shot a few times and then chases Laurie around for like another solid 20 minutes that just does not need to be there at all.
Right, where, in the first Halloween, it's all very slow. There's not a lot of big set pieces, anything of that matter. Whereas this one, the last 20 minutes, is all just one unnecessary chase scene. It feels so out of place, not because it doesn't flow with the rest of the movie, but that it has no reason to be there.
Right. It's just an excuse to add some more of Michael like breaking stuff.
Which I think unfortunately shows some of the fundamental problems that there are with Rob Zombie remaking the Halloween movie, is that he puts too much into it, whereas the first film was all about what wasn't seen or what wasn't put in there.
Right. It's like we said earlier, the subtlety is just gone. And then it does end with sort of in the same way with Laurie tackling him off the balcony. Or no, he just gets shot off the balcony in the first one, right?
Yeah, he just gets shot off. This
okay,
one,
yeah. In this one,
he charges at her, and they both
fall off the balcony, and then they struggle for a second, and then it ends with her shooting him in the head,
blowing up his fucking face, blood splattering all over.
Which
her.
there is a sequel to this one, and honestly, it's been a while since I've seen it. I don't remember how they retcon the fact that he literally got shot in the face in the last one. I would have to watch that movie again, but as opposed to the 1978's tight 90-minute runtime, this one adds an additional 30 minutes of totally unnecessary bullshit
on both ends, it seems,
on both ends,
and the climax of the film.
Well, we've got like the 30-minute backstory at the beginning, and then the extra like 15-20 minutes of bullshit at the very end. So they shorten the main part of the story for the most part, and that's really the meat of it, and that's what it should stick to. Like I said, none of it is really bad from a filmic standpoint. Like, it's all shot pretty well, like the action's good, but it just feels unnecessary. At a certain point, you're just like, why are they doing this?
Well, in that way, I think I disagree with it in that sense. I think it just shows a lack of pacing, that they didn't really get how they were going to put all these pieces together, but they threw them all in anyway and just overstuffed the whole thing. And I feel like it shows a lack of efficiency.
I heard somewhere that Rob Zombie was originally trying to make 2 movies with this. He was trying to make one just on the origin story and another interesting actual remake.
Well,
and I'm just imagining, if the pacing is bad in this one, how awful would that be split into 2 movies?
Oh God, right. The original is only an hour and a half, maybe a little over, and this one is about
right about an hour and a half.
And this one is 2 hours, and so they put way too much in there without really giving anything interesting. And I would feel very wary about the idea of it being its own origin film and then doing the other one.
I cannot imagine that first 30 minutes extended into like an hour and a half or longer.
Yeah, I'm honestly not a very huge fan of Rob Zombie's films. Haven't seen The Devil's Rejects, which I hear is supposed to be the best out of all of his, but did not like House of a Thousand Corpses.
I haven't seen either of those. I've like you, I've heard really good things about The Devil's Rejects, bad things about House of a Thousand Corpses, and bad things about The Lords of Salem.
Oh, right, which that came out 2 years ago, something like that.
It's been longer than that, but yeah, I haven't heard great things. I've seen this one, and I saw the sequel to it. The sequel is much, much messier than this. Overall, I think that this movie is entertaining, especially like some of the stuff with like the stepdad at the beginning, and then the oversized mask, because it's just so funny. Overall, it's just not nearly as tight as John Carpenter's Halloween. It's much messier.
Yeah, well, I think Rob Zombie really has 2 sides of the spectrum for his movies. You have the goofy, carnival, macabre stuff, and you get that heavy House of a Thousand Corpses, which I agree is a really shitty movie. It's really poorly made, not scary, just kind of annoying.
I always dig Sid Haig, though. I always like seeing him and stuff.
Yeah, well, he's much better in Devil's Reject, which is a sequel to House of a Thousand Corpses, but a completely different movie. Because the other side of the spectrum is like an obsession with like 70s grindhouse horror movies and B movies. Devil's Reject really pushes to that side of it to its benefit. And I feel like Halloween kind of falls in the middle.
I think so too.
You know, it tries to do the 70s exploitation stuff, semi-straight face, but at the same time, it can't help itself but fall into some of the traps of the goofy and silly carnival type of stuff. You know, you get that with the big head mask. You get that with the over-the-top dialogue. The dialogue, for the most part in this movie, is pretty bad.
Yes.
Yeah,
You know, the acting can be good, but the dialogue is not good.
Yes, there are a couple of times when Malcolm McDowell delivers his lines where you can like see in his eyes that he's kind of pained that he has to say that. But like Eugene said earlier, Malcolm McDowell really shines in this. Like he's by far the best out of everybody because it's Malcolm McDowell.
Right. Yeah. It's a shame that
he's a great actor.
How did he get attached to this project? Because he's just, he seems like he should be miles above doing this kind of movie. So.
Yeah, he should. He's been in some really bad movies though.
That's true.
But you know, I love Malcolm McDowell. I can't get enough of him. He always makes any bad movie better. I just want him to quietly talk me to sleep every night. You know.
Well, I guess we should just jump into ratings.
Yeah,
for this.
I think we've just about covered everything. Not to rehash what I said too much, but you know, really messy, but still entertaining in its own right, pretty much except for the last 15-20 minutes. I'm gonna give this 3.5 out of 5 just for its entertainment value alone. Rob Zombie has definitely got some good horror sensibilities, even if he doesn't really quite know how to always like tightly put them together. So,
well, I did not enjoy this movie very much. I think that it takes away from what made the first Halloween so good and tries to do something different, which doesn't work. You got to admire that he wanted to try and explain Michael Myers, but it was not very interesting for me to see how he came to be, especially when the first movie focuses on that basically nowhere. It does not try to really explain Michael Myers except as the monster, the evil force that he is.
And he's scarier that way. I agree with you.
Yeah.
The origin is unnecessary. There's just some entertaining stuff within that, not necessarily story related.
Right.
I feel like I should clarify that.
A movie can be entertaining and not be good. You can, if you want to try and just watch a movie that you can laugh at and just sort of turn your brain off to, then this is certainly it. This is a late night Halloween movie when you've already watched the good ones and you're just looking for something to laugh at. So for me, I'm going to have to just give this 2. I think that it does have value in that sense, but not very much for me.
Well, this is an interesting movie to rate because I think there's a lot of things it does well, but there's a lot of awful things in it. You know, like they rip out all the subtlety from the original, which is, you know, a cardinal sin in a way. I thought, you know, they had some interesting ideas that they were playing with, you know, with the origin story of Michael. Some of it worked for me. I think the problem with it, though, is because they showed the initial kills with him wearing not one but 2 masks, it just felt kind of redundant throughout the whole thing. I think if they would have built the mask thing in that section, it would have worked a little bit more effectively. But because they explain so much of who Michael Myers is and why he did what he did and does what he does, it really removed the teeth from the movie, in my opinion. It made it feel toothless. And sure, a lot of the movie was entertaining, but it wasn't really scary.
Oh, no.
And that's one of the biggest problems I have with it. Felt a little misguided.
I think the problem is that Rob Zombie subtlety is not in his vocabulary.
Yeah.
You know, even with his music before he started making movies, and Rob Zombie and White Zombie are both pretty guilty pleasures for me. I actually like Rob Zombie's music.
I never
it's
listened,
fun.
but I did see him live once, and
That's pretty sweet. Yeah,
it was a cool show. So
he's good for that sort of, you know, over the top exploitative.
oh, certainly, yeah, it was over the top. He came riding out on like a giant skull with flames.
Hell yeah,
so.
fuck yeah, that sounds awesome.
Which I can understand that, like, there is something to just that sort of that macabre style and all of that. Very cool, I'd say.
But sometimes you need subtlety, especially when you're making a film, because the subtlety balances the over the top stuff. Like, you want to have a good mix of both, and I think that's really his problem as a filmmaker.
Well, the interesting thing too is he tries to make this remake pretty straight-faced. You know, he tries to go pretty serious with a lot of stuff, but he captures some of what scares people from the first one, but not why it scares people.
Yes.
So ultimately, I feel like this movie was a little misguided, so I'll give it a 2.5 out of 5. Worth checking out at some point, but definitely watch the original first.
Absolutely.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So that gives our average rating a 2.6 out of 5 pods.
All right.
So next we'll jump into awards. I have them titled the Haddonfield Invitational Awards.
All right.
Fantastic.
So
Makes me feel like I'm back in high school.
Handing out the trophies. You millennials, all of you just need trophies, and all of you want to give out trophies.
I just want
you guys
all
are misguided.
The only reason I ever did any kind of sports was for the participation trophies.
you snowflakes not wanting to be killed by a psychopath. Grow up.
Yeah, what's wrong with all you? Get some backbones, work in a coal mine or something.
Okay, so we have these two movies, the original and the remake. Out of the two, which one did you find more entertaining?
Now that's a little tough, because I think the first Halloween, since it's a slow burn, that it takes its time with a lot of stuff, that it can feel a little too quiet in a lot of places. Certainly there's so much buildup and suspense that leads around it, that it's trying to be more of a horror film than any sort of comedy. That is tough, because the remake, there's a lot more to poke fun at or to talk about, but it's just not a good movie. So.
It's not a great movie for sure, but I'm gonna go with the remake on this one just because I think it's a lot more fun. The original is definitely a more tightly constructed horror movie, but it's, like you said, it's kind of slow at times, not to its detriment. You know, it's slow, it's subtle, it's trying to create more atmosphere than anything, whereas with the Rob Zombie one, it's just kind of a hot, gooey, fun mess. So I'm gonna say the remake for me.
See, I'd probably actually say the original, because while the remake is definitely funnier and has a lot of entertaining moments, by the last half hour, it starts feeling its length.
Yes.
And a lot of times, it feels like a long movie.
Yeah.
But at least
that
this
kind of
is...
undercuts the entertainment value for me.
This is something that, well, Fear.com was also 2 hours, but was an awful experience to try and drudge through. At least the remake, while it does drag at some points, it keeps a good enough pace where you're not tearing your hair out or anything, just waiting for it to finish.
Yeah, by the last 15-20 minutes, it's like, okay, this needs to be over now. That's at the only point where I started getting exasperated. So you say the original, Ben. I say the remake. What about you, Eugene?
Yeah, that's a toughie. I think I will have to say the remake as well. Just, it does have that fun in it. It's something that if you watch with friends, you're going to be able to talk about it. The first movie, not so much. So if we're talking about putting in the context of a movie you're looking for on a Saturday night to watch with a couple friends while drinking beers, the remake is certainly the one to do that too.
Haha, we win. Give us money, Rob Zombie. Sponsor our podcast, Rob, please. I said I liked your music earlier. I used to listen to Dragula in high school all the time.
I saw you live. You didn't see me, but I saw you.
I've seen 3 of your movies.
There we go. We must be some of your biggest fans. Haven't met many others, so.
All right, let's move on.
So scariest. This should be.
I think this is pretty easy.
Yeah, it is easy. I mean, the original because
the original
actually
definitely
succeeds in trying to create a certain air around it. So
and because it leaves Michael as a blank slate, it really gives you a lot of room to project your own fears onto him. Whatever you really find scary, you can, make him into that. It's still, it's dated. I don't find it particularly frightening, but I do think it's definitely scarier than the remake.
I think that's a problem because there are a lot of people who would watch Halloween or even watch The Exorcist and they'll just find them boring snooze fests that they don't think there's anything scary or even exciting about any of those films. But people that enjoy this remake and they would actually consider it scary. So it's strange what people actually find terrifying.
For a lot of contemporary audiences, they equate gore and blood with fear. And I understand for people who are not like big horror movie fans who will like go see them around this time of year and, maybe are a little bit more squeamish with some of the gore. Because I feel like I've been so desensitized to this from all the horror movies that I've watched that like gore doesn't bother me at all. It can be fun, but it's not really scary, So are we all on the same page? The original's the scariest?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so next one is best scene. This one might be a little trickier. My vote probably goes to the original Don't Fear the Reaper scene, actually. When they're smoking a joint in the car and behind them you can see Michael Myers driving behind them.
I'm going to say the scene where he kills his sister in the remake with the oversized mask. Because it's just so ridiculous. He looks like a fucking bobblehead, like the mask is even bobbling around like while he's stabbing her, and I haven't laughed that hard at a horror movie in a while. So that's the highlight of that movie for me, for sure.
That was a pretty hilarious scene.
God, that's a tough one. I think I gotta say, just at the way it made me feel. I guess the whole scene when Michael Myers breaks out of the mental institution in the remake, and I think maybe part of that is just because I think it's a little funny with Danny Trejo's character getting tossed around and calling him Mikey and just pleading for his life, like, no, Mikey, like, you're calling the main villain of the movie Mikey. That only hurts the whole impression of this character, who already, as we explained, acts like a man-child. At least in the original, they didn't go into too much about how he thought or behaved, but in this one, he sort of just boiled down to, ooh, me wear mask, me find sister, kill Danny Trejo.
Rusev Machka. Yeah, I felt bad for Danny Trejo. He didn't do it. He didn't do anything wrong. Well, no,
I think that's
he kind of did something.
strange thing that I feel like might have actually added to the new Michael Myers quote, if that's what Rob Zombie was going for, because we see that Michael Myers does have a side of sympathy for people who are kind to him.
Only to his mother and sister, though.
His mother and and the baby, of course, because the baby hasn't done anything to him. But I mean, you even see he kills those workers who are raping the girl in his room, and they've been mean to him, and it just seems like it would have been a side to his character that he does have this sort of sympathetic area in his head, which if you're going to show him living in an abusive family, you'd think they try and explore that maybe all of it isn't exactly his fault, but it doesn't really go any either way, and so it just falls apart, I think, any sort of understanding of where Michael Myers stands. Besides, of course, that they had to put in that he's looking for his sister, which isn't a thing in the original, because that I don't think that was ever the plan, to make them related. That was just something they came up with in the numerous sequels.
In the sequels, yeah, because it's definitely not a part of the original movie. I think it does. They do that same story in the second one that follows up the 78 one. But yeah, they just decided to like throw this into the new one.
Who do you think was the best Dr. Loomis? Was it Malcolm McDowell or Donald Pleasance? Personally, I think Donald Pleasance really killed it. He did a great job.
Donald Pleasance is good, but I like Malcolm McDowell's character a little more. He seems a little more fleshed out than Donald Pleasance. I'm going to go with Malcolm McDowell.
Well, I can understand where you're coming from, because Donald Pleasance, I mean, he's not just a complete, frantic man trying to catch the criminal. You see that that scene when he's in the bushes and he tells that kid to get away from the Myers house, and it's just one of those silly really things. Funny. Like, he feels like much more like a real character, like a real person, than I think Malcolm McDowell ends up being, with the way he, almost sobs when he has to say goodbye to Michael. He's like, "You're my best friend."
Well, yeah, that's a little corny, but I think there's more to Malcolm McDowell's character, because we see that he does want to help Michael for a while, but at a certain point he becomes just exploitative, like the lines become blurred. Is he really trying to help Michael, or does he really just more care about his legacy from being like the doctor who took care of Michael Myers? He's got that aspect of selfishness to him, so I think that makes him a little more interesting.
Yeah, he was a little too self-absorbed for me in the remake. I mean, in the original, it was pretty clear that he didn't ever really care about Michael Myers.
He just saw him as the monster.
Because
so
he immediately...
extends into everything else he does.
And intelligently, concluded that Michael was evil incarnate, which Malcolm McDowell kind of gets at with his book.
The Eyes of the Devil.
Yeah. In the whole origin sequence, you never really feel like he sees Michael as pure evil,
right,
until he does bad things, and then he's like, "Oh, he's evil," and then he brushes it off, like with the fork thing, for example. He's like, "Oh, he's true evil," and then whatever, they don't care about it. So yeah, I think Donald Pleasance was a better Loomis.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to say Donald Pleasance as well.
I'm gonna say Malcolm McDowell, but all right.
Who do you think was better Michael Myers? I have to give the new movie props for making him so tall.
Yeah, certainly
he's
more
6'7" in this movie and really imposing.
Yeah.
But I think the fact that they made him talk and they undercut it by explaining.
It's like in the original, he just looks like a gas station attendant with a mask on.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah, he's wearing the coveralls from the tow truck that he stole. But he's still really tall in that, where they do the scene where he kills the one girl's boyfriend by picking him up and putting him on the wall and then stabbing him, and he's pinned to the wall with the knife.
Well, I think they make him more imposing.
Yeah, well, no, he definitely
remake.
feels bigger in the remake.
He's a big boy.
He's still tall in the first one or in the original, but in the remake he feels more broad-shouldered too.
In the remake,
he's way bigger.
He clearly drinks his protein shake.
Yes,
yeah. He's been getting swole, and I mean he's obviously hella strong because he carried a 1,000-pound gravestone by himself from the cemetery back to the house. So I'm gonna say though the original, just because they leave so much more to your interpretation, that I think he's a much more effectively scary killer in the first one than in the remake.
I would agree. They don't over-explain.
Yeah, I feel the same way. So
the original.
And best overall film, that should be obvious.
Yeah.
Right,
Go watch the original.
It's the
Halloween.
original.
Great. It's one of the most successful independent films ever made, and it's just something to really look at and
it really
admire.
I think it really cemented John Carpenter's legacy too.
Oh yeah.
If you want to get drunk, have fun, and roast a movie, watch the remake.
Yeah, it's
but
fun.
If you want to see a great movie, watch the original.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So, Eugene, for the challenge last week, you unfortunately lost.
Yes, that is right, unfortunately.
Matisse assigned you the movie Halloween 3.
Yes,
Season of the Witch.
Halloween 3. Directed by one of the editors on the first Halloween film, and apparently a close friend of John Carpenter, Tommy Lee Wallace, who also directed Fright Night Part 2, and he also directed It, the original TV movie back in the 90s.
Huh.
So,
interesting.
yeah, he's had his experience in places depending on how you feel about the original It, might change your views on this movie.
Well, it's not a very good movie, but it's definitely enjoyable.
Yes. Yeah, no, certainly the original It. It's a lot of fun to watch. I just saw that for the first time like a month or two ago, and it has its place in history, I guess. But with this one, they wanted to try and do something different with the Halloween franchise rather than just doing the same formula with Michael Myers stalking Laurie Strode. That they wanted to do something with the Halloween series where they would have stories revolving around Halloween, but make it about something other than Michael Myers. Which you do have to admire in a way. I don't know any other franchise that has actually tried to do that, to just completely shed itself of the previous films and to try and make Halloween more of an anthology series, not just about Michael Myers. As an experiment that doesn't work out too well for them, but I certainly admire the effort. The story in this is there is a toy company, Shamrock something.
Silver Shamrock, I think?
Silver Shamrock, that's what it is. Halloween is coming up. You see these commercials everywhere in the movie for these masks, which are super popular with kids for some reason. They're the most generic masks that you could see. Like, it's a jack-o'-lantern, it's a witch, and then it's a skeleton. But apparently people are going crazy, and every kid in America has to have it.
When did this movie come out?
This came out in 1980.
82? Is that right?
Yep, 1982.
Damn, I'm good.
Yeah. So this came out in 1982. The screenplay was originally written by a sci-fi writer, someone that John Carpenter was a real big fan of. But unfortunately, one of the producers, Dino De Laurentiis, he wanted to rewrite scenes in it. He didn't think there was enough blood and gore. And apparently the writer said, take my name off of this. I want it nowhere involved with me. And so there were a bunch of rewrites that John Carpenter did, but they had to give the credit to somebody. Apparently John Carpenter did not want to do it because he felt it wasn't his project. And so they gave the writing credit to Tommy Lee Wallace, who apparently did basically nothing with the script. Just seems like all of a mess in that way. It already wasn't setting itself up too great. The opening shot is a man running down a street, and he has the mask in his pocket, and he's being followed by these mysterious men in suits. He gets caught by one of them, and in a very odd death scene, he's being pinned down on the ground, and he's in some sort of auto shop garage area, and he pulls a block out from one of the cars, and it starts to slowly roll. It is very, very drawn out, this car slowly crawling, and then it doesn't even really crush the person that's got him pinned down. It just sort of hits into him. You hear this really odd noise, like it's not really a squish. It's like a very synthy squish. And then he just lifts his head up and dies. And the guy runs away. He escapes. He runs to a gas station. He gets taken over to a hospital. And that's where we're introduced to our main character, played by Tom Atkins. And he plays a doctor who takes care of him. He sees the dude that's brought in. One of the Silver Shamrock commercials plays, which wakes him up, and he turns to Sam Atkins and he says, "They're going to kill us all." Already right there, that plants the seed for Sam Atkins to try and figure out what he's talking about.
I take it there's something sinister about this mask company or whatever.
Oh, yes, yeah, which... Well, it's pretty ridiculous what it ends up being. What happens is one of those men in the suits come to the hospital. Tom Atkins is taking a nap, so he's not paying attention. The guy in the suit comes in and rips like half of the guy's face like apart. Like he squishes his hands into his eyes. So it looks like he's trying to first like poke his eyes out, and then he like lifts it up. It's like he's like trying to rip it apart. It looks very odd, and I don't really get how the murder occurred, but
this is just a guy, right? Like he's not like supernatural or anything. anything. He just pulls this guy's face off.
Well, now see, that's something that I will have to get into.
Oh, okay.
Because
well, excuse me.
after the man in the suit walks out, Tom Atkins hears the nurse scream, sees the man walking out of the building. He chases him down. The man in the suit gets into his car, pours a tank of gasoline all over him, and then immediately lights himself on fire.
What?
Yeah, it's very strange. He goes up in flames, the car explodes. Yeah.
What?
And so he's confused. He doesn't understand
I'm confused too.
Yeah, and also there's a subplot where he's like a neglectful father. He doesn't pay very much attention to his kids, and so
Is he an alcoholic?
yes, he is.
Oh my god, I was kidding.
He doesn't drink very much, but they do make a point about his drinking, which is strange. Yeah, it's not even like he's a raging alcoholic or anything. They're just like, oh, a drinking doctor, beautiful combination. So he has to try and wants to figure out what happened with all this. And the daughter of the man who was murdered comes to identify the body. She eventually meets up with Tom Atkins again because she wants to figure out what happened. And so does Tom Atkins. He's invested in trying to understand because, in all his years as a doctor, he's never seen something as strange as this. They think that the guy might have been on drugs, the man in the suit, and he says something along the lines of, they're saying he's on drugs, but he looked like a businessman. And so businessmen can't be on drugs. Weird.
Yeah, businessmen don't do drugs. Everybody knows that.
Again, he's trying to figure out what's going on. And then he finds out the man that was murdered ran like a costume store that had the silver shamrock masks in stock. The daughter she's been doing some detective work and she finds out that he was supposed to pick up a shipment of masks from their main warehouse, the place where they manufacture all of the masks. And so they have to go into the town and investigate. And that's when it gets really strange, because you find out it's one of those company towns where everyone living there basically is employed by the company. And they're all Irish. And
the Shamrock thing? Is that why that is?
Yeah, it's like the entire town is filled with Irish people. They all came over to work for this company.
I knew you couldn't trust those potato eating bastards.
And so there's already that the more mystery grows as they come into this town and understand more of this company. There are two other people there that they see. There is a family of three. It's a mother, father, and a child. The father also owns a costume store, and he's there to talk business. And another woman who's there to pick up a shipment.
So does everybody in this movie own a costume store?
Apparently, I guess.
Right.
You either sell costumes or you're a doctor.
Okay.
And apparently
the only two jobs that exist.
The owner of the company is one of the richest men in America just for making Halloween masks, which how do you make a business off that? You see in almost every town when the Halloween stores come up, they're gone after a month.
Well, yeah, they're all pop-up stores because you can't sell Halloween costumes all year around. Right. You will make no money.
So you wonder how that makes any sense. I mean, sure, it's a movie, so let's imagine for a second that Halloween is one of the most profitable holidays in America. During that night, one of the woman who's there to pick up her order finds there's a little silver disc that's put on the back of every mask. It falls off of hers, but she finds a microchip.
What?
Yeah, and she starts poking around with a hair clip. Like, I don't know what she was planning to do. Like, is she gonna read anything off of it by poking around with the clip? But what happens is a burst of electricity zaps from the disc onto her mouth. It tears it apart. That's one of the cool things about this movie. It actually does have some pretty cool effects. And so her mouth is all torn apart. You see her teeth and her eyes are blood red because of the electricity. And then a bug crawls out of her mouth.
What?
Right, so this is...
I've never seen a microchip do that before.
So this is when you begin to understand more of what is at play here. It's some force within the masks that can kill. A lot of workers from the warehouse, they come over, they take her in a stretcher, and they move her out. They meet the boss of the company as well, and then they overhear him saying to one of the workers what happens, like it was a misfire. Well, I feel like I gotta just really get down to the meat of this. I don't want to focus too much on explaining everything. I did not mention this in the beginning because I think it would give it away immediately. I certainly did not know it would play into the story when I saw it. But earlier in the film, you see on TV a pillar from Stonehenge has been stolen, and that they have no idea. So you gotta hang in there.
Okay.
And so it turns out that Silver Shamrock stole the pillar of Stonehenge and is putting pieces of Stonehenge into those little discs into every single mask that they make. And it's because when the electricity bursts into their head, it causes mystical forces of Stonehenge, like bugs and snakes, to come out of their heads. And it's not actually clear why that is his master plan. Also, that all the men in suits, they're robots, they're androids made by the company.
Oh my god.
Because he has some sort of obsession with, like, he has like an automaton from like the 1800s, and so he has some sort of obsession with all that kind of stuff.
See, now what's confusing, at least to me, about that is that if he has the ability to make lifelike androids, you'd think that that's what he'd be focusing on making his money off of rather than Halloween masks.
Well, and apparently it's, you know, with the fact that they're all Irish, it has to do with like sort of the Celtic mystical forces that still exist in the world, and so it's meant to be some sort of grand big sacrifice.
But Stonehenge is in England.
Well, I mean, yeah, it certainly doesn't make any sense to have Stonehenge. It's a wild reason, and the fact that they implement Stonehenge is so ridiculous. And again, I didn't think it would come into play with the film because why would I? Why would I think that would happen? After that reveal, they test it and they play the commercial that you see throughout the entire movie. For some reason, all these kids are obsessed with the commercials. Like, there isn't a show or anything to it. They just want to watch the commercials, and they're telling kids to be inside at 9 to watch their commercial.
To watch the commercial.
And so that way, when they watch it, it activates the disc in their head. And you see it in a scene with the kid of the family that comes to the factory. He's wearing the mask. It starts to rot away, and he starts to, like, thrash around, and he falls down, and then snakes and bugs start crawling out of his head, which is a very dumb scene where the husband gets bit by a snake, and so it's, you know, it's implied that he dies from that. But the wife just passes out, and then it's also implied that she died.
So what's the end game here? Like,
see, that's the thing. It's not made very clear. I think it's meant to just be some sort of sacrifice. I've heard other ideas that it was so that way they could put in more androids in the world, but how does that make sense to make robot children?
What?
So it seems like that is a person trying to explain the nonsense behind the whole idea. But I think as a whole, it's meant to just be one great ancient sacrifice of all these children.
To what end, though? What is the sacrifice supposed to accomplish?
I don't know. I don't know. They're like, do you really know what Halloween is all about? And all that kind of nonsense. But
yeah, candy.
They never really explain what the end game is for this entire operation. And so what is one of the silliest points in the film, already this movie's ridiculous, he finds a box of all of the discs that they have, and he knows that they're triggered by the commercial. He manages to sneak in and turn on the commercial in the base, which while it's playing, you see the doctors just not reacting at all. And they just leave it on. And then he goes up to the rafters and tosses all of the discs down on them, and then lasers just start shooting off everywhere and attacking all of them. And it is so dumb. And then a circle is formed with all the computer screens screens, and then that starts to glow blue, and then Stonehenge starts to glow blue as well. And the boss is right in between the middle of those, and then a beam of light hits him. They show a close-up of him, and it looks like they just poured a bunch of paste on his face. He looks like a plaster model. And it's not really explained what happened, but then he disappears. He fades away.
Okay, so I guess my next question, what does this movie have to do with witches?
Well, I think...
Because it's called Season of the Witch.
I think that part is probably just the mystical side of whatever
the Stonehenge thing
that they're preparing. Okay. So
that seems pretty messy.
Yeah, very, very messy. He runs away. He finds the girl he came with, and he brings her along. And then as they're escaping, it turns out that she's been replaced with an android as well. Oh. And so there's one final struggle. He gets out a tire iron and he decapitates her. He swings it and knocks her head right off, which these androids, they haven't been very tough. There's a scene where he just he's not even punching. He's just pressing his fist down into the stomach of one of these androids and he bursts through, and it's like tapioca or something that comes out of their mouths. It's very schlocky, very goofy, all of those effects. Commercial starts playing. It's getting up to the scene when the discs are supposed to go off. It's this flashing jack-o'-lantern that you see. Then the movie ends.
Okay.
Yeah. I really do admire the fact that they wanted to try and do something different to make Halloween not just about Michael Myers, but more about just Halloween.
Well, yeah, it seems like they really took a dramatic left turn.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Oh, and another thing, they want to separate themselves so much that on 2 separate occasions, they show footage from the Halloween films. No. The Halloween movies are supposed to exist within their world as movies.
Okay.
And so that way it has no connection, no relation to any characters, to any events that happens, because those are movies in this universe. And so you could tell, if it had succeeded, that they really wanted to cement the idea that this was going to be a change in the Halloween series. But it took over 6 years after this movie to make another Halloween film.
Wow,
so
6 years. Holy shit.
It must have been a real blow just to the whole concept of what they wanted to do with this. It just has such a nonsense plot. The reveal that occurs is just so strange and
was it
not
fun?
explained
Was
very
it
well?
Fun at least?
Yes, I enjoyed this movie. I enjoyed the experience of watching it. The same cinematographer from the first Halloween, and I know he's worked on a bunch of other John Carpenter films. He worked on this, and so all of it looks really good.
And John Carpenter still did the music, right, on this one?
Well, it says that he did, but I don't know if that's just a matter of he's included because they have some music cues from the original Halloween. So I'm not sure how involved he was in this soundtrack. Certainly nothing's very stellar about the soundtrack. The opening credits, I think, have a pretty interesting sort of techno style opening, but otherwise than that, it doesn't really have much else going for it in its soundtrack. And so you really can't look at this as a Halloween film. If you do, well, you are definitely going to be disappointed. And if you look at this as its own standalone film, it could be fun. It could be another one of those movies you watch just to talk about with your friends, just to poke fun at, just drink a couple beers too. And so if I did have to give this a rating, which I will, and I do, I would give it a 3-star rating because I think that it certainly is not, it's not a bad experience. Like, it's just,
I might have to check it out.
Kind of a hot, convoluted mess.
Exactly.
It sounds pretty entertaining, I must say. You've kind of sold me on it.
I mean, the fact that they put little pieces of Stonehenge into all these masks for this mystical power for snakes and bugs to crawl out of their heads, it's a wild idea. And
haven't you ever heard that if you go to Stonehenge and you break open one of the rocks,
lightning will zap out into your face.
It's just full of snakes.
Yep.
St. Patrick drove the snakes out of Ireland and right into Stonehenge. Well, it
So-
seems to me that it was because of the failure of this movie that they decided to take the franchise back to Michael Myers.
Right.
I think if this had been a better movie, then they would have maybe continued on with the Halloween series as like an anthology.
Yeah,
but
and
instead they were just like, oh, fuck it. Let's go back to Michael Myers.
And I honestly would have been interested in seeing how that would play out. I think definitely worth the watch, but go into it knowing that it is not going to make any sense and it is not about Halloween.
Okay.
So,
All right, that about wraps that up. So,
Yes, there we
Ben,
go.
you want to give us our game for this week?
All right,
our
game.
Halloween game.
Game
Our
time.
Halloween spectacular
fantastic.
game.
Spooktacular.
So the game is called Original or Remake, and I've pulled some trivia, some quotes from both movies, and yet to decide whether it is from the original or from the remake. So question number 1, or spook number 1.
Ooh, I'm getting shivers up my spine.
This movie had difficulties getting pumpkins as it was shot in April.
I'm gonna say original.
I'm going to say remake.
It was the original.
Cha-ching! 1 point for me.
Damn it. Because I feel like that would be something that was completely overlooked in the remake. It's like, oh God, where do we get pumpkins?
Yeah,
Rob,
well, they
Rob
probably-
Zombie almost certainly has his own pumpkin patch that he grows all year round.
He probably has a large collection of fake pumpkins in his basement.
Yeah, I feel like this man lives Halloween all year round.
Absolutely. Okay, number 2. This movie was released in late August,
Well, I'm going to have to say the remake.
I'm gonna say the remake
Yeah.
too.
and you both are correct.
Yeah,
Sweet.
right.
Yeah,
I know the
apparently-
original came out in October, so
Yeah.
I seem to recall this movie coming out in around that time in August.
Yeah,
10
apparently
years
they
ago.
didn't want to compete with Saw. I
Oh,
think it was
wow.
like Saw 4.
Because Saw 3 or Saw 1 came out in 2003 and this came out in 2007, so yeah, that would have been Saw 4.
Yeah.
That makes a lot
But
of sense.
at the same time, doesn't make any sense, though. You're releasing a Halloween movie in August.
Right.
Come on. Okay, now I'm going to quote Loomis, and you have to tell me which movie this came from. His eyes will deceive you. They will destroy you. They will take from you your innocence, your pride, and eventually your soul. These eyes do not see what you and I see. Behind these eyes, one only finds blackness, the absence of light. These are the eyes of a psychopath.
Remake.
Yeah, remake.
Yeah.
God, I
Okay.
remember that.
Yep, remake.
I think the only reason that I remember that so well is because when young Michael tells Loomis that his favorite color is black, Loomis goes on that tangent about black not being
Oh,
a color.
right.
It's the absence of color and light. So that makes that one a little easy.
Yeah.
I'm still up, Eugene.
Yeah, I know. Goddamn.
Number 4. The young Michael Myers from this movie went on to become a cop.
Oh.
I'm gonna say remake.
I'm going to say original.
It is the original.
Yes. All right.
Tie
Sweet.
game.
There we go.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, well, the thing is, like, with the remake, he's still pretty young. He's probably in his
right,
20s,
but
so-
this came out 10 years ago. He could still have become a
Yeah,
cop.
well, he has
'Cause
the
he was
acting
probably-
chops to become a cop, you know?
Yeah, well,
Not
that's
to
part of-
continue acting, but probably to become a cop.
All right, what's
Okay,
next?
number 5. If you look closely, you can see palm trees in the background of this film.
I'm gonna say original.
Shit. I think it'd just be good if we say different ones. I'm going to have to say remake.
It is the original.
Yeah, I learned that in the horror class I took in college. That they shot this in California.
Yeah.
They shot the
Man.
original in California, so you can see palm trees in the background. So I knew that one already.
All right.
Sorry, Eugene.
Nope, it's all good.
Well, I did have a tiebreaker, but we don't need it.
Yeah.
Looks like Matisse got this one yet again.
Oh, not again.
Next episode will be our Saw episode.
Yeah, we'll be talking about Saw and the torture porn genre.
Torture porn. Gornography.
I'm actually pretty torn on this one between giving you a movie that's really, really bad or giving you one that's really good.
Nah,
I
dude.
think you should
lay
see.
it on me. Give me the bad.
You want the bad?
Yeah, give me the bad, man.
All right. Well, I got a couple options to think about, but
boy.
I think if you want the bad,
I do want the bad.
all right, I'm gonna say you need to watch Texas Chainsaw 3D.
Oh. Ooh. Okay.
The one that came out like 2012, I think. 2012, 2013. Yeah, it's a fucking hot mess. I've seen it before, and if you want the bad, boy, are you gonna get it.
All right. Texas Chainsaw 3D. Shit.
Well, yeah, so our next episode will be all about horror movies.
That's right. Our next episode of our horror podcast will be all about horror movies.
In a drastic turn of events.
This is now a wrestling podcast. Let's talk about tables, ladders, and chairs. What did you think about Kurt Angle taking Roman Reigns' place in the Shield?
Man, I'm waiting until they introduce meningitis as a heel, so.
Yeah. All right.
But yeah, next episode will be all about Saw and the torture porn genre. So we'll cover a few different movies from the genre.
Right.
As well as the new Jigsaw movie.
Yeah.
Yes, who would have thought that would happen again?
First Saw movie in what, like 5 or 6 years?
Yeah,
Has
well,
it really been that long?
Maybe longer.
yeah, well, they
boy.
made a big emphasis on the last one, billing it as like the final chapter.
Right. It was Saw the final chapter.
Yeah,
So
it was very bad too.
It was.
Didn't help. Yeah, we'll have a special guest on, Cleveland Mosier. He will be helping us try to dissect these movies.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Check us out on all of the platforms. As we mentioned last time, we are on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, SoundCloud, Stitcher, pretty much everywhere other than Spotify, which we're still coming soon. Spotify. Leave us a rating and a review on your preferred platform. Also, follow us on Facebook and Twitter, Pod People Pod on both of those. Start up a conversation. We want to hear from the community. Reach out to us. Let us know what you think. Give us your thoughts on the Halloween movies or
Tell us
anything
why
else.
you think Rob Zombie is a master director.
And also tell us how you feel about Rob Zombie's wife, Sherry Moon Zombie.
Give us all the sweet, sweet details in your brain.
Shout out again to Ben for doing our entrance music, which is great.
Thank you.
Very John Carpenter inspired. Check out his stuff on SoundCloud, Spotify, Bandcamp, Eaten by Nostalgia. And before we get going, we want to drop one more exciting plug. Ben and I do some work for a very small indie game company, Light Arc Studios, and we're excited to announce the newest game that is on the horizon, called It Stares Back, which is a horror game, a indirect sequel from our last game, Castle Battles, available on Steam, the App Store on iPhone, and Google Play as well. Check that out, and follow Light Arc Studios on Twitter and YouTube to see some of the stuff that's going to be going into this game.
Check out the super cool trailer that dropped today too.
Yes, indeed.
It's,
that'll
pretty
be
rad.
on the Light Arc Twitter and on the YouTube page as well. And I'm sure Ben and I will be retweeting those. So follow me at Mr. Van Awesome.
I'm Mr. Sheets on Twitter.
I got nothing to plug. Don't go to my Twitter. Don't go to the haiku page. I haven't updated it in years.
They're pretty, yeah, but the ones that are up there are pretty damn good, I must say.
Yeah, check it out.
Eugene, our master of
You should
haiku.
plug your LinkedIn.
Oh, I have a LinkedIn. That is true. Don't go on that. Haven't updated it in years.
Why don't you put up some topical Halloween themed haikus? I think everybody would love
I
to
heard
see
your
that.
Friendster is popping off.
Yeah, you can also check out my MySpace page too. I will put you on my top 8 friends list just if you friend me, because I don't have any.
If you're in the Milwaukee area, check out my Tinder. Swipe right.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Bye.
Yeah,
Well,
bye.
I'm Matisse Van Rossum.
I'm Ben Sheets.
I'm Eugene Lundeen. Have a great Halloween.
Happy Halloween. Eat lots of candy.
Trick or treat.
Trick or treat.
Bye.